It's that early in the morning. Justin's not even on screen because we are talking to Damian Mackey, who's down all the way down under in Tasmania. It's about as far away from here as you could possibly get. Morning, Damian. It's early.
Marty, how are you?
I'm okay. I'm okay. I'm on the
Yeah,
coffee.
yeah. Well, we're it's evening here, so it is whiskey time. So
Aye, it's whiskey.
yeah,
I'll be getting whiskey later on. Don't worry about that. We'll remedy
yeah,
that. Just a bit early for me. Just a bit early for me.
yeah,
So we are joined with Damian, who is the founder and it's a partnership between you and your wife. I have to say, you're the founder of Hunter Island Whiskey down in
yes.
Tasmania.
That's right. That's right, Marty. Yes. So
How did this
yeah,
come about? How did this come about?
well, it's a bit of a long story. Myself and my wife Mad, we got into the whiskey industry here in Tasmania back in the mid 2000s, so about 2005, 2006. The first whiskey style we produced was triple distilled single malt whiskey, which we released under our original Mackey name. We wanted to do something a bit different to what everyone was doing here, and we always loved Irish whiskey over Scottish whiskey. So we thought we'll do triple distilled single malt as it was a fairly Irish thing to do, and it was a great success, great point of difference. We had a long journey since then. Part of that journey was we left the Mackey brand behind somewhere, so we're no longer associated with that. That was in 2018. And so in 2019, we started to set up our very original distillery that we had started all those years ago again and go again. But this time, we wanted to go even further down into our Irish roots and our Irish tastes. And we decided to have a crack at making Tasmanian pot still whiskey. So mixed mash bill, following the Irish technical file.
Okay.
And again, it was another thing that no one had been doing before in Tasmania or Australia more generally. Since then, a few other brands and distilleries have popped up who are having a go at the pot still style of whiskey. But we laid down our first barrels in late 2019, early 2020, just as COVID was hitting the world, which suited us perfectly because we planned to do nothing for the next 2.5 years except make whiskey and hide. So we chose the name Hunter Island because of...
Why Hunter Island? I mean, is there? Explain that to us.
Yeah. So up until very recently, our plans to move from our small start-off distillery space into a much bigger distillery involved moving to a location down on Hobart's waterfront called Macquarie Point.
Nice.
It's a big old former marine industrial area, which has been all the old buildings have been taken away, and it was going to be redeveloped for a multi-purpose city renewal thing. And we were going to move in. We were going to move into one of the old sheds that they were going to keep, called the Good Shed. Everything else had been demolished, but the Good Shed had a bit of heritage value along it. But buried underneath Macquarie Point is the original island called Hunter Island. And back in 1804, when Hobart Town was first started off by the original settlement, the only way to get people on and off the ships and goods was to wait for high tide, get everyone off onto this little rocky island called Hunter Island, wait for low tide, and then walk along the sandbar to the main part of the land. And there's all these beautiful old sketches and paintings and things of this happening. But within a few years, they built up the sandbar to become a causeway. Then the causeway became a street called Hunter Street, which is a very historic street down there. And all the land around it was filled in over the last 200 years. So Hunter Island is buried underneath where we were going to move. But about 6 months ago, the government changed its position on Macquarie Point, and they're now proposing to put a big Australian football stadium there, because Tasmania has just been granted a license to have a team in the Australian Football League, and everyone's sort of very excited about that. But this Macquarie Point location is probably the only site within walking distance of the CBD, which is the sort of location you need those sort of things nowadays. So unfortunately, all the previous plan that we were part of has been shunted aside. But we we called ourselves Hunter Island because we were moving there, but we like the name so much we're going to keep it. Even though we're trying to find, we'll have to find another site. So long story there, but there you go.
So you've been granted official status that you're violent enough to have an Aussie football team, is that?
Yeah, well, that's right. Yeah. Hopefully, we'll attract a few Irish recruits down to the Tasmania.
Oh yeah, no problem at all.
Every AFL team seems to have a couple of those, and we'd love to attract some Irish talent down to.
Well, put it like this: if anyone's not sure what Aussie football is, basically what happens is a ball sort of gets thrown onto a pitch and people have a fight for a period of time, and then somebody declared a winner. That's essentially what Aussie football seems to be.
Well, yeah, it's actually the closest to any other code is actually Gaelic football.
Yeah,
but it's also got a bit.
Gaelic football is a lot. There's a lot less punching in the face in Gaelic football than there is in Aussie rules.
Yeah. They're trying to cut all that out because everyone worried about head-high tackles. So I think
it's a great sport. Great sport.
Yeah. Well, it's great. Like just as Gaelic football is, it's a great sport. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, it's fast. It's really, really quick. Now, just a bit of history stuff. Tasmania has lots of links to Ireland. There's a huge sort of Irish heritage there, isn't it?
Yeah. So many of the convicts that came out to Van Diemen's Land, as Tasmania used to be called, and I think Van Diemen's Land actually features in some of the Irish folk songs from the 1800s of people being thrown in prison and packed off as convicts. There was obviously a lot of English and probably Scots and Welsh convicts coming as well, but a lot of them were Irish. Yeah. Many Tasmanians, myself included, and my wife Madeline included, have a lot of Irish heritage and a lot of Irish Catholics in our ancestry going back, and for stealing a loaf of bread and things like this. Or one of mine was sentenced to 7 years transportation for attempting to burn down his master's house. We've discovered that, and we're not sure of the exact details.
Well, all I will say is there's always these stories. I was talking to Finoan O'Connor not that long ago about this, and there's these stories about the poaching makers, that the poaching makers are all these old guys up the hills secretly doing it. The vast majority of poaching the illegal whiskey was being made in the big houses. That's where it was being made. Yeah. So there's probably a fairly decent. It was all being made there and smuggled out, and all those guys. That's who was making the most of it. But so there's about a quarter, 0.5% of the quarter or half of the population have Irish descent, don't they? Or Irish origin.
Look, I don't know the exact figure, but it is a huge percentage have Irish descent. And of course, as well as the convicts, there were other convicts that were political prisoners as well that were also banished out here to Van Diemen's Land. Sometime after the 1850s, 1860s, there was a big movement against convicts coming here, and they stopped the convict era, and there was such a stain at that time on everyone's name that they decided to even change the name of Van Diemen's Land to Tasmania, which is after Abel Tasman, the Dutch explorer from the 1600s who first found the place. So we've got all this Irish, and there were in early colonial times there were legal whiskey distilleries here in Van Diemen's Land, plenty of illegal ones as well. And we've done a bit of research, and we do think that at least some of them were making what would be called pot still whiskey with malted and unmalted barley in the grain bill. Then in the 1830s, we have Governor John Franklin and his wife, Lady Jane Franklin, came, and the colony was an absolute mess of alcohol at that time, and half the population were paralytic half the time. And John Franklin and his wife, Lady Jane, were teetotalers, and so they said they know how to fix this. So they closed down all the distilleries. They passed laws that favoured brewing over distilling on the theory that if people were drinking beer and cider, it would have to be better for society. Don't know if that really worked out that way, but anyway, from the 1830s, no distilleries in Tasmania until the 1990s, when Bill Lark, who taught me how to be a distiller, he got the law changed. And he's considered the godfather of Tasmanian whiskey, and he made contact with people in Scotland and said, I want to make whiskey in Tasmania, and got a lot of help. And he started off the Tasmanian whiskey industry in about the early 1990s. I think it's 31 years old or 32 years old now.
Oh.
And since then, we've now got we've got about 80 distilleries in Tasmania, and probably 60 are making whiskey. We lose track. There's so many popping up all the time. Yeah.
A few years ago, I was down at the Irish Whisky Academy down in Middleton, and I met a lady called Anne Gigney. Is it Anne Gigney?
Oh, yes.
She was, because at that time I hadn't heard anything about Tasmanian whiskey, and it was her was the first person that sort of put it on my radar. That there was this it was quite small at the time, but it was growing every day, as you said, and she started the Tasmanian Whisky Academy, I think it was called. That's it.
Yeah. We have the Tasmanian Whisky Academy. Other sort of branch off businesses that have started in Tasmania. We have 2 still makers here, two companies that are coppersmiths that are making stills. We have 3 cooperages that recooper the barrels for the industry here. And we have quite a number of independent bottlers and people like that, as well as all the distilleries. So it's a thriving, vibrant whiskey industry in Tasmania. Yeah. We have our own barley that's been grown here forever for the big breweries that have always been here. Now there's God knows how many craft breweries have popped up in the last 20 years as well. We've got beautiful regions in the Midlands of Tasmania for growing barley. We have our own maltster. Up not far, about 10 k's from where I am now, is a company called Joe White Maltings. They're part of Cryo Malt, I think. So they malt the barley for everybody. So it's wonderful.
You have this isn't. I think possibly the perception of Tasmanian whiskey would be that it's quite a small niche thing, but I mean this is a big industry. This is from the ground up. You're growing your own barley. You've got cooperages, still makers. Lots of distilleries, lots of variety, I assume. So, why is Tasmania? Why did this happen in Tasmania? Is there a reason?
Yeah, look, I think, well, going back to Bill Lark's vision 30 odd years ago, he's a great trout fisherman, and Tasmania has one of the best wild trout fisheries in the world, up in the Highland Lakes area. And Bill was up there with some friends and drinking some, probably some Glenfiddich or Macallan or something, and thinking, look, we've got peat bogs up there. We've got beautiful wilderness water. We've got a wonderful temperate climate. We grow our own barley. We malt our own barley. Why aren't we making whiskey? And then Bill just got it into his head. He was going to get that. He had to go to the federal government and get the law changed to make small craft distilleries legal, and did all that. So. Yeah, look, our weather patterns here are nothing like the mainland of Australia. Like mainland Australia is what you see on the ads. It's deserts. 3/4 of mainland Australia is desert. Yeah. But there's tropical forests. There's the Great Barrier Reef. There's crocodiles.
It's a big area. Let's just say it covers a lot of ground.
Yeah, but here in Tasmania we have mountains. We have a temperate climate. We have the 4 seasons. We have snow on our highlands every year. We've got, I think 45% of Tasmania is in reserves, like national parks or World Heritage Area. And from there, we have fabulous rainforests, and the water that flows out of those peat bogs and those rainforests and button grass plains is just amazingly wonderful water. We can legitimately lay claim to the cleanest air in the world, because on the northwest tip of Tasmania, here at a place called Woolnorth, we have one of a series of international air monitoring stations that are around the globe, and they're so sensitive that they can detect someone smoking a cigarette, 3 kilometres away. But the one here in Tasmania regularly comes up with the cleanest air in the world, because if you think about it, west of us, where all our weather comes from, you go across the Great Australian Bight, you go across the Indian Ocean, you miss the bottom of South Africa, then you go all the way across the South Atlantic Ocean before you hit the land, which is South America. So the air comes from sort of 2/3 of the way around the world before it gets to us.
You would need Snoop Dogg would need to be in smoking joints in the Falkland Islands to get to you guys.
Yeah. Oh, that's right. Yeah. So it's just a great, wonderful, clean environment here. We have a landmass about the size of the island of Ireland, but only 500,000 people living here. So it's not as if we're overpopulated or anything like that. You can go for
You're selling this place to me now. I'm beginning to think I need a trip to Tasmania.
You must come down. We'll show you. Not only can you see all our beautiful natural wilderness areas and our great clean food and that sort of stuff, but we've got all these wonderful whiskey distilleries here, and I'll give you a personal tour. We'll go around and have a look at all our great whiskey that we make here.
I'm going to have to ask Justin for a loan of a few pounds. Tap Justin for a few pounds. That's what we need to do. But there's a story. I picked this up on your website about a guy called James Hackett, who he came over. Did he start the first distillery or one of the first distilleries in Tasmania? And he was originally from Middleton.
Yes, that's right. Absolutely. Yeah. That was an amazing connection that we found. And I think it goes along with so many people from Ireland coming to Van Diemen's Land, as it was generally. Yeah. And we thought, oh wow, here's someone who came and started. I think it was the first distillery or one of the first distilleries in Hobart Town, as it used to be called. And we looked up. He came from Middleton. Yeah,
it's a small world, to be quite honest with you. It's not a big place. People have this idea the word's huge. It's not really. People go everywhere. You guys started off. It was single malt when it was the Mackey brand, but now it's Hunter's Island. It's pot still. That's what you guys are going for, pot still. Why did you switch over? Was it just like your own personal taste, or did you see a sort of gap in the market, or what?
Yeah, look, when we left our first distilling life behind and our original Mackey brand, we'd done triple distilled single malt, and we wanted to do something new and different. And when we first started distilling in the mid-2000s, Irish single pot still whiskey was still something of a sleeper. It still hadn't really been reborn. But when we was thinking about what we were going to do when we start again in sort of 2018, 2019, we sort of looked around, sort of, holy cow, look how amazing Irish pot still whiskey has just come back to life in a huge way. And we thought, look, that's what we've got to do. And a shout out to our friend Johnny Holton, who does transportation whiskey at our distillery, because he really convinced us that was the way to go. And so we'll
your mash
bill. We'll be coming over to the mash bill.
The mash bill. I like the fact on your bottles you have the mash bill, the mash bill on the thing. 65-35.
Yeah.
So that's 65% malted barley, 30 unmalted, and 5 oats.
Oats, yes. Yeah.
So
yep.
How did you come to that? How the experimentation?
Well, we did a lot of research, of course. Looked at the technical file that Ireland has for its definition of pot still whiskey. In 2019, Madeline and I did a fantastic research trip to Ireland, and we had to throw in Scotland as well. I think we went to 35 distilleries in 5 weeks. Did a great big trip all around Ireland. Just researched the hell out of Irish pot still whiskey. Yeah. We landed on that. We did a little bit of experimentation, and that's our mash bill. I'm not saying that in years to come we might start experimenting with that, but when you think of all the other levers you've got to pull as a distiller, the cuts in your intermediate run, and then your cuts in your spirit run, the yeast you use, the mashing and fermentation regime, and of course the cask management, the barrels you age it in. You've got all these other levers to pull. So we thought we'll stick with one mash bill for some time. We may stick with it forever, but at this stage we're leaving that as it is and playing with the other levers that you can play with. Yeah.
Now you guys use your yeast. Is your yeast slightly different than some other people's?
Yeah, look, we always use SO4 ale yeast, so a beer yeast, when we made our original Mackey whiskey. You don't get quite as much alcohol yield, but you get bigger character. Yeah. So it's not as efficient in terms of volume of alcohol, but we just love the characters that produced. And when we tried it with a pot still mash bill and fermented, the wort up from that into wash, we thought, look, we're going to stick with that. really want to make quality whiskey
Yeah.
rather than, if we were run by an accountant, we probably wouldn't do that.
I don't think any accountant really. There's no accountant I've ever heard of that is big fans of distilleries. Oh my god! But no,
Yeah.
what type of characteristics are you talking about from over your sort of Saccharomyces? The normal distiller's yeast. What's characteristics do you get from your ale yeast?
Yeah, just I think all the characteristics are just turned up a notch. They're there in bigger numbers. But it's beautiful. Our new make spirit ends up. It's got sweetness, and with the pot still mash bill, it's got just the spices are coming through from the unmalted barley, and
Yeah.
But I think from the yeast, it's just a big, malty, sweet, beautiful, smooth flavors in there. Some citrus and banana.
You think it just pulls it up a little bit, tightens it all up, doesn't it?
Yeah. But as I said, with a bit less alcohol, so at the end of the day, you're actually getting less whiskey bottles from the whole process because it's not so strong in alcohol. But that has an impact on the still runs as well. Everything, all the three different kinds of still runs going in at slightly less alcohol has got to have some sort of impact on the character.
It's about you can't have everything all the time. You get. I always think if you're going for the flavor element, you want massive. Everybody wants flavor, but there's something sort of has to give at some point along the way. There always has to be a sort of trade-off between these things. There's no perfect way of making whiskey. To please the accountants and people's taste buds and run it through the stills and make everything shiny, sparkly clean at the end of it. There has to be some sort of trade-off here.
Yeah, and right at the end of it, everyone's got their own taste buds and olfactory system, and so what's a fantastic whiskey for one person is not so good for the next person, which is what I think that's part of the great thing about the whole whiskey world, that so many people can enjoy different characters of whiskey and different styles of whiskey.
There's nothing pleases me more whenever I do a tasting, and you always get this. Whenever you're doing tastings with the public, you'll always get people who are not necessarily whiskey drinkers. And what you do is you set down a number of different styles, and you let them, and then suddenly goes, I quite like that one. And there's nothing pleases me more than I quite like that one, because it's that little bit where you've just opened the door and people can step inside and go, something. I didn't think I liked whiskey, but I do. I quite like that one, and that's just the key you need, because it's the same as most of these things. People try a whiskey years ago and think it all tastes the same, and it doesn't. There's such a huge range of tastes, and every little bit of it is a little tweak on what the end product is, and that. But honestly, just whenever you get someone that says, I quite like that one, because you know that's possibly the first step on their whole journey and the whole whiskey world, and that always pleases me. Now, in terms of cask management and what you're trying to do with your flavor profiles, it's bourbon and port.
Yeah. So when we started again doing pot still whiskey in end of 2019, start of 2020, look, I was absolutely of the view that we were going to do single cask releases. It was either going to be a port release, a bourbon release, sherry release. And by the way, in Australia, because of the EU GI laws, if you hear the word tawny, that means Australian port, and Apira means Australian sherry. So we've all, as whiskey people using ex-Australian fortified wine barrels, we've adopted those terms as well, although we do get a lot of actual port barrels from Portugal or Spain, sherry from Spain and so on. But it's really good. Anyway, we I was going to do single cask releases, but then a lot of the early barrels we laid down were 30-litre casks, and so they age quite quickly. You have to watch them because they can easily get over oaked and underaged. Especially if you have them in a hot tin shed and they get 2 Tasmanian summers. But our bond store's a bit cooler than that, so not so worried. But when we first started to decant some whiskey that had matured, we quickly realised that marrying our bourbon aged whiskey and our port aged whiskey or tawny, it was one of those cases where that only happens in the whiskey world, where 1 + 1 can equal 3. So we thought, we've got to do that. So we then fairly quickly decided that our standard release would be the bourbon port marriage.
Yeah.
And we always want to have some of that. We've got a lot of bourbon barrels laid down, a lot of port or tawny barrels laid down. We've got less sherry or Apira and a few other odd ones laid down as well, but they'll be special releases. Like we've got in Tas Whisky Week, which, as I mentioned, starts 2 days after we get back from Belfast Whisky Week, we'll be launching our first special release, which is an Oloroso sherry cask, which is just a crazy. That is a single cask. Well, it's 3 30-litre Olorosos that were aged for almost 3 years and decanted and married. And what we've been doing with our early releases from the 30-litre casks, we've been decanting them after around about 2.5 years. Then we've been marrying them together in a 125-litre bourbon cask to settle and get a bit more of the bourbon influence as well. So that's basically our standard release. You get the deep fruits from the port and the banana and coconut and a bit of more sweetness from the bourbon, and it just seems to work really well with our new make spirit.
I think bourbon cask finishing, especially when it's married up with bourbon cask and port. Sorry, I meant to say port. When it's married up with bourbon, you get that sort of raspberry ripple ice cream effect. Always sort of pumps in. That's normally what I expect from that kind of thing. And with pot still. Now oats in your mash bill. Oats.
Yeah.
Some people think oats just contributes a sort of textural thing.
It is.
They do, but they add. Oats is a weird thing. It kind of does weird things to whiskey.
Yeah, look, it's adding some creaminess to our whiskey, and that's on top of one of the defining features of Tasmanian single malt double distilled whiskey or all Tasmanian whiskey, and that it is got a creamy mouth, thick texture in it, and we think that's from the barley strains that are grown here, which are really brewing barley. They're not distilling barley strains. They're brewing barley strains because they've been here for the big brewers. But again, they don't ferment up to as much alcohol as distilling barley would. But we're also happy with it here in Tasmania that we don't want it to change because it adds a very creamy mouthfeel. So you add the oats of our mash bill on top of that, and it just adds to the creaminess. And there is this oatiness in there. It's what I call, and probably only Australians, Tasmanians will know what I'm talking about, but Anzac biscuits. Anzac biscuits. So they were, Anzac stands for Australian and New Zealand Army Corps. It's from World War I, when we had to combine with our friends across the ditch in New Zealand to form an army corps to send over to Europe for World War I. Gallipoli, yes. So and Anzac biscuits were sort of made to send over to the troops to keep them going, and they had a lot of oats and grains and it's a classic Australian biscuit, and there's a little bit of that I think from the oats in our pot still whiskey, which is very pleasing. Very pleasing.
Right. Sometimes I get criticised, or not criticised, but people will say, you're interviewing someone from Australia or America or whatever, how do we taste these whiskies? People are going to get a chance because you're coming over. You're coming over to Belfast Whisky Week.
We are indeed.
Excellent. Yay.
Yeah.
There's dedicated Tasmanian whiskey events happening all through the whole festival. So you guys are coming over. Yay. Excellent.
Yeah. We're just looking forward to it so much. So there'll be 4 distilleries personally represented. That's ourselves, Hunter Island, Johnny Holton from Transportation Whisky, Christy Lark from Killara. Christy Lark is Bill Lark's daughter, so she's got distilling right through her veins.
Pedigree.
Yeah. And Bill and Alison McHenry from McHenry's distillery will be there. with their whiskey, but we're also bringing 4 other whiskey brands across as well. So 8 Tasmanian whiskey brands over there. So people will get able to get a really good feeling for Tasmanian whiskey with 8 of us being there.
Yeah. Wow.
I think there are 4 Tasmanian tasting events.
Yeah.
And at each one, 4 of us will be there. So you'll have to look up on the Belfast Whisky Week program to see which actual whiskies are in each actual tasting. There's a welcome to Belfast dinner, I think, on the first Friday night, and people can buy tickets to that. We'll of course be at the Expo on the last Friday, I think that is.
The last Friday, yeah.
Friday night. Yeah.
I'm flat out all that week with various different things. But yeah, I'm really looking forward to bumping into you guys and going and seeing some of the Tasmanian whiskey, because honestly, I think it was 2015. I met Alan Gigney at the Irish Whiskey Academy, and that was really when it sort of first flagged up. But the other kind of in Ireland, one of the big connections is Cologne, or tiny little Cologne distillery. That was where Brendan got his kind of inspiration. Although he's from Ireland, it was Tasmania that actually supercharged them to get Cologne up and running.
Yeah, so that was an amazing character in the Tasmanian whiskey scene, Peter Bignell from Belgrove Distillery, and I call him the crazy inventor of the Tasmanian whiskey industry, because he taught himself how to weld copper, built his own stills. He's done in his previous life. He restored a water mill, a heritage water mill. He does sand sculptures and ice sculptures. He's been to.
Oh, that's right. That's Brendan's next outing. He's going to start sculpting stuff now.
But Brendan got hold of Peter Bignell. Not sure how, but Peter Bignell ended up going there. I think Peter was in Scotland. He went over and saw Brendan in Ireland, and the bromance went from there, and Peter gave him some advice, and Brendan's gone from strength to strength, obviously. Amazing distiller, Brendan. Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, for a very small place, for a very small distillery, he makes an awful lot of noise, a lot of ripples. But it's kind of funny, because it's kind of went full circle, because the Irish went to Tasmania, but it was Tasmania. And put it like this, you know this as well, a lot of the big guys are watching what a lot of the little guys are doing. And there's lots of big guys keeping an eye out to see what Cologne's doing, you know?
Yeah. Matt and I were lucky enough to have time to drop in and see him in 2019 when we did our big trip around. So, hi, Brendan, if you're watching.
I'm sure he probably will be. But yeah,
I'm sure we'll catch up with him in Belfast Whisky Week.
Oh, he'll be about somewhere. But you guys also do poaching. You do a Tasmanian poaching.
We do.
Is it your new make spirit bottled, or?
Yeah. It's basically our new make spirit. We cut it back to 50% to make it, half reasonable. But look, if people really want to get an indication of what we're doing with our mash bill and our fermentation, there's nothing better to try than our new make spirit. And we
absolutely. I think this is an absolute easy win for people. Just bottle your new make spirit. That can be your baseline, and everything from that you can marry it up and pair it up against it. I think it's a great idea.
Yeah. So again, we're labelling it Tasmanian poaching. We'd never dare call it Irish poaching, of course. And same with our pot still whiskey. I mean, we really, we're wanting to honour this amazing style of whiskey, which as many pot still whiskey fans will know, that if you go back long enough, 100 odd years, it was probably inarguably the biggest whiskey style in the world before all the calamities of the 20th century befell it. And then almost went extinct by the 1980s, and only a couple of brands left in existence, and now rightfully exploded in popularity again as people are searching for this great wonder. The thing I love about the style is, look, it's got the smoothness of the triple distilled process through copper pot stills, because most of it's made that way. But that mixed mash bill just adds so many depths and layers of character into it, that it's as complex as the most, or maybe even more complex than one of the great Scottish single malts, even peated single malts, but it's gone off in another direction with the pot still spices. And
it just opens the palate up. It just opens up you're painting with lots more colours now than doing your single malt whiskey. Single malt whiskey, there's such variation in it, but now at the very start of the whole process, you have just a huge range of stuff you can do with malted and unmalted barley and your other cereals that can go on it as well. Now, you guys are coming over in force to represent Tasmanian whiskey at Belfast Whiskey Week, so people can get hooked up with you. There are a number of events all through, so check out the website, and you'll be able to come and meet and taste and sample Tasmanian whiskey. I'm really looking forward to trying this, because it's kind of hard for us to get some of this stuff over here, but there are people selling it. There are distributors in Ireland and the UK as well.
Yes, well, that's part of one of our big reasons for coming over. We want to start opening up how we can get more of our whiskey, or we're not exporting at all anywhere at the moment. And we'd love for Ireland and Northern Ireland, the UK, to be our first export market and get some of our whiskey over there, along with all the other brands that we'll be representing. 8 brands. Yeah.
And so the Tassies is coming over in force. Are you organising a GAA Aussie Rules football game? Possibly
we should.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Let's go.
Yeah. My hamstrings will last 5 minutes, but I'm willing to play that 5 minutes if we'll
get Justin to referee it. We'll get Justin clued up in the rules of the whole thing. But listen, Damian, we're going to get hooked up in a couple of weeks' time, and I'll get to see you when you come to Belfast. I can't wait, you guys, and I know it's going to be a huge success, and you guys are going to go down really, really well. So it's been a pleasure talking to you, and I'll see you in a couple of weeks' time.
Thanks for having me, Marty. I'm going to love catching up, and really interested to see what you think of our whiskey. Yeah.
I'm really looking forward to it. So I'll see you soon. See you soon, buddy.
Thanks. Cheers.